Hi, and welcome back to Your First Aid to Coding, brought to you by Cupertino High School. Last time we talked about how First made a switch in the FTC program, replacing the NXT brick by Lego with an Android phone. As a result, we also had to accommodate with software changes. So Robotics, the platform that we used before, is being replaced by the industrial Java platform, and we will be programming for Android. We also discussed prerequisites you would need to develop in Java and Android. For a full list and description of those prerequisites, we recommend that you go back to our previous video and you can click on the link and you can check out those tools before we continue onwards in this tutorial. Lastly, those of you that joined us in the last tutorial saw that you wrote Hello World for the first time in Java. Congratulations and really good job on that. Now, we're going to be going in depth into variables because that is a fundamental in Java and any programming language. So, what is a variable in Java? Well, variables, as we discussed in our first video, store data of various kinds. We're going to be talking about the 8 primitive types. By primitive, I mean types that were built into Java from the day it was made. Types that weren't created by other programmers. You know, when you made the first version of Java, the variables only store these types of values and nothing else. The 8 basic, kind of like you can say the alphabet, like the 8 basic types store these values. They store numbers, which include integers and real numbers, which I mean by decimals. They also store characters, and they can store whether something is true or false. Variables also have a type, and their type defines what kind of data they store. Now, the types of variable, as we said before, they store these, and as you can see, there's some types that overlap. So you'll have multiple types that are storing integers, multiple types storing decimals, and variety of real numbers. You have one type storing characters and one type for true or false. So let's get started. Let's get started with integer storing variables. So here you have an integer type called the int. So let's take a break here and let's go to Eclipse. And this is our program from last time. In my first aid package, I will start a new class. This class will be called variable. Remember, I'm capitalizing the first letter, capitalizing the next. Variable types. I want to include a main method. I forgot to introduce that in the last one, so you had to type it out. But using Eclipse, you can just check off the main method and it'll include it for you. Don't worry about anything else for now. And here you go. Everything is pre-written for you. Now, we're going to be declaring a couple of variables and seeing what they do. So, the way a variable is declared in Java is first, let's comment this and kind of show you a template, is by first the variable type, variable name equals to value, and in Java, everything ends in a semicolon, at least most things do. Each statement, like an assignment statement or a subroutine, these things end in semicolons, sorry. As you can see here, in the Hello World program, we had the print line end in a semicolon. So here we have another line ending in a semicolon. You can also just declare a variable and not assign it. Whoops, my bad. And this variable is known as not initiated. This variable can be classified as initiated because it has been given a value and has been declared. Now, let's declare an int. So what is an int? An int stores integer values. It is the default integer type. It's a convention. Programmers tend to use the int over other types simply because it's the most convenient to use. It's got a decent range. It's it's the Goldilocks of all the integers. It's just right. So we'll just define an int here, int sample int, and you can name the variable whatever you want, equals 3. This means that the variable sample int has been created and stores the value 3. Good, now let's see what it returns. Let's see, the value of the local variable sample int is not used. This is not an error. What it's saying is you have the value assigned, you're just not using it. We'll be using it later on, but for now let's go over the other types of integers. Now you have a long. So a long takes up more data than an int, but it's got way greater limits. So, we can just say long sample long is equal to 3, and then I'll just add a bunch of zeros. The variable I should include of type int. And as you can see, it's out of range. And the way you assign a long is by adding an L to the end. So this signifies that it's an int. Even though it's defined as a long, this is an int value. The way you create it into a long value is by adding a capital L to the end, and the computer reads it as whatever that number is, and it'll skip the L in the actual value, but it'll use the L to tell itself that this is a long variable. So the variable sample long of type long has been created and stores the big value. I don't want to type again. Great. So we have these two types. Now we can take a look at the short variable. The short variable type also expresses integers, but it takes up a lot less data. It also has a lower limit, so this is for very small numbers. Short, sample short, is equal to 4. And this, on the other hand, you can assign as a regular, and you don't have to add the L. So what I'll be doing is, for your convenience, I'll be writing special assignment next to the ones that require a special assignment. For example, here you have to add the capital L to the end of the value to signify that it is a long variable. Otherwise, it will return an error like it did before. Here we have the variable sample short of type short has been created and stores the value 4, I believe. Yes, 4. As you can see, I've commented this program already very extensively, and that's just something I'm a habitual commenter. I comment a lot of my code. You don't have to comment this extensively, but for the purpose of tutorial, I am commenting this so you can look it over later. There will be a link to this code. You can look it over and, just for your convenience. Now, the last type, which is the smallest data type out of all of the data types, is the byte. And the byte data type has a very small limit that goes from -128 to 127. Byte sample byte is equal to 3, 1. And this also does not require a special assignment, so we're just going to leave it as it is. So the variable sample byte of type byte has been created and stores the value 1. Great. Now we can print these variables. So let's use the print statement, and as you can see, I just used the local value of the local variable sample int, and therefore the yellow light bulb went away. What the yellow light bulb is, it's kind of like a warning. It's saying you have created data and you've made a space in the computer for this variable, but you're not using it, so this variable is practically useless. Now it's no longer useless because it's being used, therefore this is gone for the int. And I will just repeat the process 3 more times, and this will become sample long, or let's keep it in order, sample byte. As you can see, it's going away. You have your sample short and your sample long. So print the int variables value, print the long variables value, print the short variables value, and lastly, print the byte, not ite, bytes, variables value. Now we can save this, and let's see if it will compile. And there we go, we have run our program. So we have printed out successfully 4 variables of 4 types, and each one of them is a different type, storing a different kind of value. The long variable has a special assignment with capital L at the end, so you better make a note of that. And everything else is assigned normally, as long as you know, for example, if I did 4.1, now it's going to return an error. Now when I compile, let's compile it anyways. Yes, it has errors, so proceed with launch to see what the error is. There we go. You cannot convert from double to short, so I'll explain that in a bit, but it returns the error. And now we'll run it again, just to make sure it's okay. There you go. Now, we can be a little creative, make space for the other variable types, so we can say the following are integer storing variables, and there we go. Let's make a return. This will create a new line. And what we're doing here so we printed the integer variable values. Now we will print. First, we will leave a space between categories. Again, I'm leaving space in between the code as well, because in Java you can jumble everything up together and it'll still run. So if I did, well, that wouldn't run obviously because it's commented, but you know, spacing doesn't matter. This would run the same. Other languages tend to be more picky, so if I kept it like this, sometimes some languages wouldn't compile because of the spacing. But in Java, the spacing is flexible, so you can have something like that, and it would still run. I just like having my code organized, and I would definitely recommend that you do too. Print line, the following are decimal storing variables, and you run, and there you go, you have a space. That space was created because of print line. Now if you want to see what print does, there's a statement called print, then it would do this, and there you go. There's no more extra lines, so you want to just leave it all spaced out, because this adds an extra return at the end, so you want it to add an extra return at the end. Now what we're going to do is move on. So we've finished integer storing variables, and now we're going to move on to decimal storing variables. Don't be afraid, I know these are very crazy numbers, bear with me. Now, the double variable, similarly to the int, is a default variable type considered by programmers. So if you were to create a decimal value, you would use the double. It's literally the Goldilocks. So you would just use a double variable. So here we're just going to define a double variable. Create and assign double variable values. Actually, let me make that clear in the other section as well. Create and assign integer variable values. See, let me create some space right there. Close that. And there we go, we have some more space. There we go. That's nice. That's nice. So, let's see if we can close this even more. There we go. We have all the space in the world. So, where was I? Create and assign the integer variable values. So I've commented the fact that we're going to begin assigning and creating integer variables. And assignment. You don't have to be this elaborate in your comments, but it is a very good habit to have in the beginning, because this really gives you the ability to think, and that's what comments do for you. Now I'm going to have this, which will say explains how variable assignments work. End of explanation. And there you go. You see how that's variable sandwiched? Well, that's how you want it to be. And there you go. It's a lot easier to read now, isn't it? A lot easier to read. Okay, so now what we're going to do is create, decimal variable values. So now we're going to create a double, similarly just like we created these variables. So double, my bad, cannot type today, double sample double is equal to 3.14159.265. Let's say an estimation for pi. So again, the variable sample double of type double has been created and stores the estimation for pi. And now I'm going to be going into the next variable type. So here we have a float. So we created a double right here. A float, similarly to a short, it takes up less data, and since it's a decimal, obviously, then the limitations, you can't really go that many decimal places as compared to you can for a double. For our purposes, just stick to double for most cases, but people do tend to use float for simpler numbers. So the way you would assign a float variable is by saying float sample float is equal to 3.4. You see how it returns the error? Let's check it out. Cannot convert from double to float. There you go. This, similarly to the long, requires a special assignment. So let's include a special assignment comment. And you just add an F. And there you go. Problem solved. Let's see what it says here. and yeah, you have to use a capital F, my bad, and the capital F made it so both of these variables, obviously same warning that the variable value is not used, which we will use later. And now we can say that the variable sample float of type float has been created and stores the value 3.4. End of end assignment. And we print the decimal variable categories, and let's begin. So system.out.println sample double, print the double variables value, and system.out.println. So now we're going to be printing the float variables value, and you want to comment that right here. So I feel for some of you, if we're going too fast or we're going too slow, if we're going too slow, that's good. That means you're getting it. If we're going too fast, I'm going to be taking time to go over all this code. Just bear with me for now. So you want to, obviously, should include that here, is marking the end printing. And here you want to end printing. And before we go on, you want to make sure that your code is running. So let's compile, and there you go. Congratulations, you have successfully mastered, well, I wouldn't say mastered, yeah, I guess mastered the basics for number storing variable types. You know 6 out of the 8 variable types now. You know the decimal storing ones, so double and float, their uses, their pros and cons. You know the integers as well. So let's just do a small recap. The int variable type stores integer values. You don't need to memorize these large numbers. Just know that it goes int is about the medium size, short is smaller than int, byte's the smallest, and long is bigger than int. Long, you'll figure it out, because what you can see is with the name, long implies it's bigger than an int, so long is longer than an int, you can say. Short is shorter than an int, and byte is a small byte size, so it's the smallest one of all. It's the smallest one out of all the variable types. For decimal stores, remember, double is the default. So you would use a double for basically most of your cases. But if you want to go simple, you just want to, float, instead of swimming, you just want to float on the water and just relax, is how I like to think of it. Just use a float variable. Just remember that float and long are two special assignment variables. So that's something you'll have to memorize, as you can see in the code here.